Sales of new vehicles up nearly 5% in the U.S. from January to March, despite high interest rates. Big automakers sold nearly 3.8 million vehicles in the past 3 months. With increased inventory, car prices are coming down, an average of about 3.5% lower in March than a year ago. There was, though, a slowdown in sales of electric vehicles. EV sales grew only 2.7% during the quarter, far below the almost 50% growth overall last year. Well, the news comes as one of the largest auto shows in the world gets underway in New York City. William Denslow is there and reports on which cars are making a splash this year.
It's a bump in the road. In the first quarter of this year, Tesla delivered nearly 9% fewer cars than it did during the same period last year. And Ford saw a near 11% year-on-year sales skid in January, but has rebounded in recent months.
They're looking for a longer range. That's one of the biggest things that consumers want, and that's been one of the big challenges, besides the additional costs with electric vehicles. So they want a reasonably lower priced car that has all the technology and the safety that everybody wants.
But some experts at this year's New York Auto Show predict EV sales will soon be rounding the corner.
EV market share will grow to over 12% this year, thus moving further forward towards the transition from early adopters to early majority.
That demand could be reliant on the rollout of charging stations nationwide. The Biden administration has pumped $7.5 billion into a plan to build at least 500,000 public chargers come 2030. New York is working to give its own electric vehicle infrastructure a jolt. The aim is to roll out hundreds of fast charging stations across the state by 2025, with at least 100 of them right here in New York City. The hope is that fast, affordable and convenient charging will ease the shock of switching to an EV. But for US consumers, some experts warn that seeing is believing.
Once we're up to a couple 100,000 charging stations, I think this anxiety will disappear. But it's just something distinctive about the US because we're just unusually large as a country with greater than average distances to, say, visit relatives.
EV sales may be stalling, but the demand for hybrids is shifting gears. Over 1 million were sold last year, with many Americans unwilling to fully commit to an electric vehicle. Car makers maintain that the future is electric, but convincing people to completely make the switch could still prove to be a bit of a journey. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
Well, taking a closer look at how sales of electric vehicles did worldwide in this first quarter, Tesla saw its quarterly deliveries decline for the first time in nearly 4 years. They fell 8.5% from the same quarter last year. But it still took back the title of world's biggest EV seller after rival BYD of China reported that its first quarter sales fell 43% compared to the previous 3 months. But compared to a year ago, sales were still up 14%. South Korea's Kia, meanwhile, doubled its sales of EVs in the United States in the first 3 months of the year, compared with the year prior. Well, we heard from her earlier, and joining us now to talk more about the global EV market is Lauren Fix. She's an automotive expert and editor-in-chief of Car Coach Reports. Lauren, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me back.
Now, how would you assess the current state of the EV market globally?
Well, on a global basis, it's certainly different than that of what's here in the U.S. On a global basis, we're seeing countries in Europe being very proactive, and they're also hearing things like Porsche saying they're not going to sell Caymans and Boxsters any longer in Europe. They're going to be selling them in North America and in other countries. That's a huge blow to Germany. But when you're looking at countries like China, they're really taking the lead when it comes to the electric car industry. Whether consumers are going to take hold of that here in North America is a completely different situation. And in some countries and some areas of the world, we're seeing really great growth. In other areas such as India, where they're really struggling to get charging stations in place. And that's part of the big challenge.
Now, Lauren, as you mentioned, China is an EV industry leader. What sets them apart?
Well, the first thing is they pretty much own 98% of all the mines where all of the lithium and all the rest of the rare earth minerals come from that are for these batteries and for solar panels. So from that perspective, they really have a grasp on the industry. They control a piece of it because they're manufacturing the most quantity of different brands that are pure electric vehicle brands. There's a lot of interesting things coming out of China, and it's really interesting to watch how they've extended their regulatory sort of discount, shall we say, or money back on their vehicles from 2023 to 2027 to incentivize their citizens to purchase Chinese vehicles who typically want to purchase vehicles produced in their country.
Now, you did make reference to this a little bit earlier about whether or not China could get a foothold in the U.S. market. Occurs to me, of course, that, Teslas are, for example, domestically made, but pretty expensive. And presumably Chinese vehicles may be a bit more affordable. Could that kind of help gain a foothold?
Well, there's a lot going on with that. There's a political angle on that. Some of the politicians don't want to have Chinese vehicles into this country. Depends what happens in our elections in November. If President Trump wins, he already said he's going to put a 100% tariff on any Chinese cars coming to the U.S. because it will hurt the unions, it'll hurt the manufacturers, it's certainly going to impact jobs in our economy. On the other hand, if President Biden gets reelected, it's highly likely they'll work some sort of deal where they're allowed to bring those cars into this country. They're going to be produced in North America following that free trade agreement that they have in place between Mexico and the U.S. And BYD and a couple other companies are already building factories as we speak to sell not just in Mexico, but to hopefully sell in the U.S.
So China, of course, has ambitious targets for its EV sales as well as production. Do you think they're feasible?
Well, again, there's a lot of factors political wise, but they can build BYDs and other companies like SAIC and so forth, NEO, and they could easily bring them into the U.S. Will customers buy them? It's highly likely they will. There will be some pushback, I'm sure, but they'll need to have some sort of dealer network to make that work. I think that it's very ambitious of China to build the plants with the hopes that they can bring them in without having any sort of tariffs in place. That's going to be an interesting situation to see how this unfolds. And I've been watching it, and I know they're building, and I know they're planning to make their way into the U.S. at a very low price and put a big hurt on Tesla.
And to that very point, looking ahead, what is your prediction about how they, will enter the market?
Well, I think our biggest problem is not necessarily the cars and their price point. I think it's the charging infrastructure here in the U.S. We have different charging connections, unlike in Europe where there's one charging connection, although they're all different level charges, locations in different types. Here in the U.S., we have two different charging types, and this is a problem, although they're starting to open up Tesla chargers to non-Tesla vehicles. We'd need at least 1.2 million additional chargers as of today in order to satisfy the need. So this is a huge problem. So the vehicles could come in, but a lot of people here in the U.S. don't have garages. They have rental facilities that, if you have a rental, you're not going to be able to add a charging station. So they rely on public charging, and that's always been a challenge, keeping them up and running, and then having enough of them has always been a big issue.
Fascinating insights there, Lauren Fix. Thanks so much for joining us on Global Business.
Have you ever thought, why in the world is my wireless bill so darn high? What are we paying all this money for? Speed, coverage, data, access to 5G, unlimited talk and text, mobile hotspots? We are partnering with Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile offers all of these features for as low as $15 per month. They're reimagining the wireless shopping experience and made it easy and online. No stores, no salespeople, just huge direct-to-you savings. Why should you pay more when you have access to premium wireless? Mint Mobile runs on the nation's largest 5G network. Whether you use your phone to watch YouTube, listen to podcasts, or play games, you get the same speed and performance as the big guys while connecting to Mint's network. How hard is it to switch your service? Big Wireless wants you to think it's hard, but switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to digital eSIM cards, which most phones now have, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. And if your phone doesn't have an eSIM, Mint will ship you a new SIM card for free. Just go to trymintmobile.com/LaurenFix, also linked in the description down below, to get premium wireless for $15 a month.